Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about doing an electronic detox, as we are just surrounded by devices all the time, almost to the point where we're very reliant on them. So, Donovan, what has your experience been with an electronic detox, or what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, so I have a very recent experience. This is what we started talking about before the show, but I basically went on a cruise and opted not to pay for the ridiculously expensive internet package, and so didn't have cell or internet on my phone for the last week or so. And it was a really eye-opening experience, just because in the past, in the not recent past, I have done like a digital detox of sorts.
Yeah.
But that's been quite a few years since I actually intentionally did that. And it was just a good reminder, or like a good eye opener on how much attention my phone really sucks up all the time. You know, like I felt myself very, very regularly feeling like, oh, like the impulse to check, even though I knew that everything was disconnected and off and whatever. And I was still using my phone for a small handful of things here and there, so I wasn't like 100% away from it. But just having that 1 week has made me feel a lot more aware of the ways that things are pulling on my attention. You know, now that I'm home, a lot more around like, oh, my phone, oh, my work phone, oh, my laptop, oh, the TV, you know, like Netflix has all this stuff on it.
Yeah.
Oh, the Nintendo Switch that we have, like, it just helped me feel a lot more aware of those things. Am I doing any less of it? I don't know. I've only been home for a day or two. But it has been a nice eye opener and just sort of a reset. But I would also be curious what your experience has been like.
Yeah. The experience that comes to my mind when I was kind of not necessarily seeking to do a digital or electronic detox, but it was just happened to be that way. I went on a meditation retreat, probably like 10 years ago or so. So it's been even back then. And I'm like, did we have a smartphone back then? I think we did. I don't actually remember. But it was a week-long meditation retreat in Southern Colorado. And yeah, I had no cell reception. I had no access to the internet. And it was a vegetarian dining. So I also had to go vegetarian for a week, which was challenging in itself. And I remember it being very initially hard because it just like has become almost an impulse to just check, or who's messaging me, or what's going on in the world, or like, hey, look at this. And so it was very challenging. But I think for me, maybe it took 2 or 3 days to kind of just accept it. And in a way, it was great because it allowed me to be, I think, more present in the moment. And that's part of the purpose of meditation in itself, is to be present in the moment, because I think all of us tend to be distracted by our devices. And even though they can be incredibly valuable and helpful and a vast source of knowledge, it's like, do we really need to be on it all the time? And are we becoming really dependent on it? And it's like, I don't think people realize how dependent we are until we don't have access to it at all. And it's just like a whole different thing. Although a couple years ago, I went to an Airbnb in more of a remote location, and I didn't have cell reception, which is almost scary sometimes, because if you're driving and you lose your reception, and then if the GPS crashes or something, and then you have to like search for that location again, and then you're stuck in the middle of nowhere. That can be a little scary, but we managed to get there okay. But then once we got there, there was Wi-Fi, so it wasn't like a full-on digital detox. But that's been my experience, just recognizing how dependent we've become on it.
Yeah, when you did your retreat, Did you feel after those, because you mentioned being more present? I'd be curious, it might be exactly what you meant, but if
Yeah.
you felt like you had more, what, like your focus was like clearer. Because that's kind of the feeling that I had after the first few days is like, I guess just at home or like in my normal day-to-day life, there's
Hmm.
just so many things fighting for my attention that are almost
Yeah.
all electronic.
Right.
Um, that I didn't realize until I took a break
Hmm.
how much I didn't even know really how to explain it, but just like my attention felt so much more clear and less bogged down and less there's like here's a good parallel. You know,
Hmm.
like if you're in a crowded room
Yeah.
and or like in a room of 10 people and
Hmm.
four or five of them try to talk to you at the same time, and you're
Hmm.
just like, oh god, like I'm gonna try to pay attention to this person. Okay, but what did this person say? What did this? And I feel like that's like a parallel for
Hmm.
sort of what I realized my brain is like on
Hmm.
a normal basis. And going out and having these things sort of shut off made me
Yeah.
realize that it's not even necessarily the devices themselves, right? My phone wasn't doing anything. I
Right.
didn't have my laptop. I didn't have any of these other devices, but my brain was still going like, oh, you need to listen to this person. Oh, you need to pay attention over here. Oh, you need to do this. And so I had all these just impulses to check all these things. And
Mm-hmm.
then as sort of the week went on, I felt less and less of just sort of that like chatter. And I'm
Yeah.
curious if you had sort of a similar experience or not, or if you described it a different way, or what your week was like.
I think I did have a similar experience with less mental chatter because I think the impulse, I mean, my brain's still going all in all sorts of directions, but I'm not kind of going down every rabbit hole that my thought process goes through. Because it's like when you have your phone, you're like, oh, I'm thinking of this. Let me look it up on the internet and see if it's like how accurate I am, or what's this unknown that I need to know that I don't really need to know. Like when was this movie made, or who directed this movie, or something to that effect. And it just is like, oh, just recognizing the thought that like, oh, there it is. I don't actually need to go down that rabbit hole or even really know that information. I could just be like, oh, there's a thought. Okay. And then it just goes on to the next thought. And it was just easier to move from thought to thought rather than like being overwhelmed by all these different thoughts and kind of trying to like tackle them all in a way.
I think that's a really good thing to highlight is quite often I have thoughts
Mm.
that catch my attention briefly, and then when I am connected to the internet,
Yeah.
I follow up on them, whether or not it's a good use of time or important or whatever else. And many times I found myself being like, okay, how did I get onto this page? Like, why am I
Mm-hmm.
reading about just like, I don't know, like varieties of rabbits? Like, how did I get these are work hours? Like, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just noticed how I do that when I'm watching a new show. Like me and my husband just finished White Lotus, and I was like, I'm watching it, and then I think I miss part of like the storyline because I'm like, oh, I need to know where this actor was in. Like, what else has this? I've seen this person before. What else have I seen them in? Even though I could always look that up later, but I just am like, I need to like satisfy the urge to know what it is now. And then I kind of like am not fully present of what's going on, and I might miss things, and then we have to rewind, and then that's like not always fun. But yeah, that happened.
That's that is another good thing to highlight. I think we've talked about this before, but
Yeah.
attention
Mm.
is single threaded. Like there, you can
Mhm.
only really focus on one thing at a time.
Right.
And another thing that it helped me notice is how often I am overloading my attention, thinking that I'm looking this up while watching this show, while playing this game, while talking to this
Oh.
person,
Yeah.
and realizing that, like you said, there's a large amount of information
Yeah.
or a quality of experience
Hmm.
that it is not possible to get when your attention is overloaded in that way.
Yeah.
That's another thing I realized again as the week went on, more and more of just
Yeah.
like, here's the one thing I'm doing. I'm focused in on this. And I also found that my stress
Yeah.
levels were significantly lower.
Hmm.
And it's because I was able to focus in on what I'm actually doing
Hmm.
for each thing. Because overall vacation is generally relaxing. There's not always something to do, but there were definitely pieces of sort of work or effort around like, okay, we're at this place. How do we navigate to the place we're going? Or like,
Right.
hey, these people said that the excursion we're supposed to go on is not here. So like, how do we get to this other spot? Or, these other things that could potentially be stressful, but because I didn't have all this other chatter, all this other like sense of oh, I got to do this and this and this and that, and overloading of my attention, even the
Right.
stuff that was more problematic wasn't nearly as stressful because most of those other loops had been turned off.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. I'm curious though, what I've noticed about the younger generations, even being more dependent than us. I mean, we can actually remember a time before cell phones. I mean, I remember that pretty well. And so at least that's like, but like the younger generation has always lived with devices and easy access to the internet and so many different things. I actually was reading a friend's Facebook post about her kid who I think is in like upper elementary school, maybe fourth or fifth, sixth grade or so. And they had taken away his iPad for a period as like, I don't know if it was punishment for something, but he like literally like flipped out, had a major tantrum, and just basically expressed how depressed or unhappy he is because like everyone in his class has some sort of gaming system and he doesn't. And so he feels like left out. And I'm just like, oh, wow, that's really sad that, a person's happiness in their mind, they're young and impressionable, 10 to 12 or 13, that they feel like their happiness is strictly correlated with the device. And if they don't have it, then they're unhappy. And I'm like, I mean, I get at that age, they might be not fully self aware and self developed at that point. But, I'm sure there's adults in that same spectrum too. But what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. There's a little bit of a mix of things going on.
Yeah.
First thing I guess I'll mention is that the internet for me has been effectively present my whole life. Like it when I was super super young, too young to really use it, it wasn't really prevalent. But like as a kid, I was still on my computer on the internet quite a bit. And it
Yeah.
might have been on the earlier side of like how often people were on the internet and using these things and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it's something that like has been present for me for my entire life.
Yeah.
Phones, on the other hand, obviously, like smartphones, not something that have been present the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to me because parts of it resonate with my experience in terms of like I remember being younger and being frustrated when I didn't have sort of whatever electronic device that I thought was the most fun or whatever else. And I think
Mm-hmm.
you've hit on an interesting topic of like, is it more powerful to some of the kids now because it's ever present and it's stronger around? I mean, most of these things are designed to addict you.
Right.
Um, and they've had access to it their whole lives. How much of it is that, and how much of it is sort of part of the natural like
Mm-hmm.
process of growing up and being able to be more mature about sort of your thoughts and choices and activities and where you derive happiness from and whatnot. And I don't know, maybe since you had a slightly different experience, you might have some insight to weigh in on. But I definitely remember
Mm-hmm.
being frustrated about things related to technology and electronics. But I'm very
Mm-hmm.
I believe that it was less about the actual specific, hey, I need access to the internet. Hey, I want a gaming system, and more like other people have a thing that I think is fun
Yeah.
and I don't, and I'm frustrated about that. Because I can also think of examples of stuff that was
Mm-hmm.
outside of the digital
Mm-hmm.
realm, like well, maybe I can't, but I know there were things that were more like physical, tangible goods that were not electronic. And if other people had them and I didn't when I was really young,
Yeah.
I'd be frustrated with that in a way that as a grown person, I'm not. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that angle.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I'm think like maybe 7 or 8 years older than you. So because I remember a time before internet, and then I remember the first internet was dial up. And so it was like super ridiculously slow. And so it was almost like you don't even really want to do anything because it's going to take like a minute to load a page, essentially. So it's and then I remember like we're using corded phones and yeah, all back in those days. But I remember, I mean, I had a Game Boy when I was a kid, and I thought that was like pretty, it was black and white, but it's pretty pretty cool for to have. But I don't remember having like a hardcore addiction to it at all. Like I played it, but I also like went outside. And that's my fear for the younger generation is as like they don't like have the need or desire to go outside and experience other things, other forms of leisure that are not digital, which I think is highly valuable. So that's my concern. And then I'm like, if all these younger generation don't have that experience and then they have kids later down the road, it's like there's no one that has the like they have to reflect back to the grandparents, and then eventually those grandparents will be phased out as they pass, where it's just like, what world will we live in? It's weird. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing I go on. But that was a little bit of a tangent, and I don't even remember what the question was.
That's okay. I'm just gonna go off on the next tangent, which is I mean, when I look at, because I've got siblings that are still fairly young, right?
Yeah.
15-ish.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that they spend any more time on their phones and playing video games and stuff than I did.
Yeah.
The only difference is it's more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I guess I don't have like a ton to weigh in on, except for I'm curious, to see how things turn out. And one thing that I will say is probably true and probably more widespread is part of the reason I got so interested in happiness and whatnot is because I did not have a good foundation for it or good understanding of how to produce it. And my childhood was probably pretty electronics forward facing, right? In terms of like my parents let me use a lot of stuff and have access to the internet and whatnot. And that is probably more prevalent, right? Like there are probably very, very few kids now who don't have access to the internet.
Yeah.
And I would think that if you're not given sort of these other skills or a foundation or a way of just like sort of interacting with the world outside of those devices, you're going to end up with more anxiety. You're going to end up with more struggle when you don't have those things because it's all you're used to. I imagine it's the same as if you read all the time and then you have no access to books, and it's like, well, I don't really know how else to fill my time.
Right.
And that in itself can be a sort of unpleasant experience that's sort of just like boredom or lack of stimulation or whatever. So I imagine that is going to be much more prevalent, and the need for those sorts of skills or understandings or whatnot is also going to be much more necessary than it has been in the past. I'm optimistic that those things will sort of proliferate as time goes on, right? Like as time goes on, with people having more access or like kids being more reliant on these devices,
right?
I think there will also come more learnings around like, well, okay, now a ton of kids are struggling. Okay, what do we have to do to sort of like help them understand how to cope without these tools or how to use them in ways that are appropriate? But on the same note, I do think there is a broader trend of the people who are making apps and games and whatnot getting more and more in tune with how psychology works and making things more and more addicting. So not just for the kids, but I think we're coming to a point that there has to be some sort of adjustments on that front before anyone will really be able to make progress. Because I don't think it's just kids that have a hard time without their devices. I know plenty of people who are well-grown adults that if they don't have their phone for 5 minutes, start getting anxiety, start getting like frustrated, grumpy, all these sorts of things.
Right.
And back to our topic, I think that's why it is important that if you can do it to try a digital detox every once in a while, or at least to do your very best to be mindful on
Right.
sort of how you use devices and things.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point, and it kind of just reminded me of when you detox from not just even digital or electronics, like when you detox from anything like that you're clearly addicted to, like caffeine, for example, or sugar or alcohol or whatever that might be. It's like usually if you're having bad withdrawal symptoms, then it probably means you're addicted. And so you just have to get through that rough phase and it will definitely get easier. Actually, kind of referencing, have you seen White Lotus second season or any
I
of
think
this?
so. I think
Okay.
so.
Yeah, and I actually just remembered, or no, it's the first season, the Hawaii season, where I forget the name of the character, but he's like the youngest of the
Mm.
kids. And he like he gets all his devices into the ocean basically, and they get ruined. So he can't use them on his trip in Hawaii. So he's like freaking out and very upset and like wanting to borrow his dad's phone and like just needing something to like fill that urge. But eventually he's like, well, their parents are like, well, you're not getting a phone till we get back, essentially. So he discovers this group of Hawaiian people that are doing the rowing of the boat thing. I forget what you call it, but yeah, he joins the team and he's actually like the happiest he's ever been, and he just hasn't had like, it was kind of a forced detox, which was very upsetting initially, but once he kind of like realized that he can actually live life more fully and presently without all his devices, he was way happier that he practically, spoiler alert, sorry, he basically wants to stay in Hawaii and not return home, essentially. Which I thought that would be an interesting experiment for, I think, I'm hoping maybe teachers do something like that where, let's do a challenge. Let's see how long you can go without your device and see, like, actually recognize how does your mood and attitude change for the first few days, and then how does it change, or how is it after maybe a week or so, and just kind of do a little self experiment. I think would be valuable for both young and old people.
Yeah, I think it's in the same vein as any sort of detox, which is,
Yeah.
there's some pain in sort of shaking up your schedule
Yeah.
and like just dealing with change. And then add on top of that, a lot of these things
Mm-hmm.
provide, like some sort of pleasure
Mm-hmm.
or something you enjoy or whatever else. So there's like this initial phase of just sort of like, oh, this is really painful. But once you get past that and your brain sort of adjusts to like, oh, I guess we're not getting sugar anymore. Oh, I guess we're not checking our phone every 5 seconds anymore.
Yeah.
It opens up this space to sort of see what else can fit there or what else there is.
Mm.
And that's why I think it's so valuable to do like a digital detox or detoxes of any kind, because what you find in that space can
Mm-hmm.
often be more valuable than what was there before. And even if it's not,
Mm-hmm.
um, I and people I know have had really great success with developing healthier relationships with particular things.
Yeah.
So for example, I took a big long break from alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
and previous to that long break, I don't think I had a very healthy relationship with it. But going back to it, I think now things are much more in line with a healthy relationship and where I would like it to be. But I can only figure that out through taking a break and not having, that sort of be my day-to-day experience. The same thing I think holds true for other sorts of potentially addicting items. Same thing holds true for electronics, right? Like this break that I just took is
Mm-hmm.
helping me to realize, okay, well, I have these notifications set up. I don't think they're adding anything. Oh, I'm looking at this app to get news or this app to scroll through posts or whatever else. It's just helping me to make sort of adjustments. And I think that's where the biggest value is in detox. It's not about sort of this. I mean, for some people it is, but
Yeah.
this like willpower of like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to drink coffee every day, or oh, I don't have to be on
Mm-hmm.
my phone every day or whatever else. It's, to me at least, the more valuable piece is seeing, hey, here's the other things that can fit in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And most often, for at least in my experience, for these types of potentially addictive things, there are better things that can fit in the space. I just have to be a little more mindful and present to shifting my habits a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's just so valuable to, it doesn't mean whatever you're addicted to, it doesn't mean like you can never do it again necessarily, unless maybe you're an alcoholic or something to that degree. But just like having the experience of going without the addiction, whatever that might be, for a week or so, just so you are really present on how it affects you and, what else you can fill with that space, like you were saying, I think is just really valuable. And then some people don't even recognize that they're addicted to the thing. And they are like, oh, I could totally easily quit that. No problem. But they don't. And I'm like, well, why don't you try it? I've had patients that, do pot every day. And they're like, oh, well, pot's not addictive. But I'm like, okay. And then you do it. And I'm like, no judgment if that's what you want to do. But have you ever tried it's been a year or more since you've gone like a week without it? What would life look like? And then you would know. And if it's really a struggle, then you might want to consider that is an addiction potentially. And it just because it's supposedly not addictive doesn't mean you're not addicted to it, depending on like how you're using it and how your body and your mood and your mental health respond to the withdrawal of it if you do cut it out for a little bit.
Well, I think that's another good point for any of these things that are potentially addictive is you don't realize the impact they're having on your thoughts and feelings and day-to-day activities until you've had a break from it. And often not just a one-day break or whatever else.
Right.
You need, it depends on what the specific thing is, but like a week or 2 weeks or some longer period of time to sort of, like I mentioned before, get through some of these different phases, right? Like if you drink coffee every day and you take a 1 day break from drinking coffee, it's not going to teach you very much, because what's going to happen is you're going to have the 1 day where you're like, God, I just want a cup of coffee. I want a cup of coffee so bad. I just want a cup of coffee. And then the next day you're going to be like, oh, thank God, here it is. And down your cup immediately.
Right.
And you're not going to really have learned, or I guess experienced is maybe a better word.
Yeah.
What the difference is without that thing. And I think the reason it's so hard is, like you mentioned, like, it takes time and it's not easy until you get to sort of that hump, to that point where all the chatter quiets down from not having your devices with you, or you're not having these constant cravings for things. But I think even having that expectation or understanding and kind of knowing that, like, hey, these things will subside as time goes on, maybe to different degrees depending on what it is and how you've interacted with it, but knowing that it will decrease over time, I think is something useful to have as an expectation, so that you have sort of mentally something to fall back on when the cravings do come up of like, oh, I want this, oh, I want this, oh, I want this. You can at least tell yourself, like, this is temporary.
Yeah. Or potentially you might still want to do it, but just not to the degree that you were doing it before. Like whenever I cut out sugar, which is always so hard. But I know when cravings hit and I'm like needing it every day, and I'm sometimes going to the store simply to get something sweet, then that's where I'm like, yeah, I'm addicted and I need to cut it out for a good week. So, and then I don't actually need that craving as much. And then things that I eat are way sweeter than I need, like to fulfill that like sweet craving. But I was just remembering after my digital detox for my meditation retreat, I actually I had to fly back to, where was I? Yeah, I was living in Washington State. So I was flying back from Colorado to Washington State through the Denver airport. And so not being around electronics and then being in the freaking Denver airport, which is one of the craziest airports, and there was like so much people and like so much noise, it was like almost overwhelming for me to be in that airport, when normally it's like I'm not fazed by an airport or the busyness of an airport, but that was like a little much. And so I think having that experience was good, because I recognize, wow, I'm like, almost desensitized to how that kind of stuff. And so when I become more sensitive, I can be aware of like how pervasive it is in my life.
Yeah, I feel like, in a lot of cases, I think that airport's a good example. Like, a lot of these things are necessary to a degree for normal life, in the sense of, like, if you weren't desensitized to something like the airport, or maybe the airport's a little bit of an extreme example, but like, to being able to go to places with people and have stimulation, interaction, and whatever else, or maybe a digital example is better. Like, there probably are a lot of times you want your phone, you want to be able to get text, you want to be able to call if you're out and your car breaks down, you want to be able to, like,
Yeah.
there are a suite of benefits that generally come with these things. It's
Mm-hmm.
just that it's so easy for them to pull you so hard that you end up in a place that, yeah, sure, you're getting the benefits, but you're also facing some negative consequences as well.
Yeah.
And I haven't been able to come up with a better way to sort of like rein yourself back somewhere into the middle that's nice and useful without sort of going strongly in the opposite direction. Now
Yeah.
there probably is some methods and some things you can do that can get you there, but from my experience, the fastest way is always to sort of just have a hard reset, or like sort of this
Yeah.
period of time where you can see the difference. And I think the other thing, if you try to like moderate it down,
Mm-hmm.
at least from what I've done, it's often much harder to see sort of some of the benefits. So I'll go back to the sugar example you use. Like, the times I've cut out sugar,
Mm-hmm.
I've felt like it doesn't take very long for me to realize that something like a Reese's, we'll say, is going to be overwhelming. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I just went on a cruise, so this isn't so much the case. But like a couple weeks ago, like that, we have some candy here that we give out to the guests in our Airbnb, and I was looking at it and I was just like, this like looks disgusting to me. Like, this does not look appealing,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that I could have gotten to that point, which I feel like is a healthier relationship for me.
Yeah.
Other people may have whatever sweet tolerances or whatever else, but that's a healthier place for me to be in. But I couldn't have got there if I would have just went, okay, I'm going to cut it down to like 3 pieces of candy a day, and then two, and then
Yeah.
one, and then half of one. Like,
Yeah.
the only way for me to get there was to go, like, I'm just not going to eat sugar for a while and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. No, I've had a similar experience that it just like you gotta go cold turkey sometimes. Although I with some things it might be a little harder, like caffeine, because there's worse if you're going from like 10 cups a day to zero, that might be a very hard withdrawal. But I think it's so valuable to recognize what life is like without it. And then you can kind of create a new baseline for yourself. Because yeah, it would be pretty damn impossible for me to be completely digital free, given that I work pretty much reliant. My job is reliant on like my laptop and electronics and receiving messages and responding to them. So I know I can't go like 100% without it, more than a week or so, unless I'm retired potentially. Maybe I'll try that when I'm retired. But but to like recognize, like, yeah, to see, you on your phone, there's some apps that tell you like how long screen have you been on the screen time, and that could be a really useful tool to be like, oh man, I'm literally on my phone like 9 hours a day. Maybe I should cut back. That's like practically like, and for teens, I think it's like 15 hours a day. And I'm like, you awake that long? Like, how does that even happen? So it's just good to kind of reset and start like, okay, well, obviously I can't go without it 100% forever, but like, what is the bare minimum I can achieve if it does have to be a part of your life?
Yeah, I definitely want to echo that. I did not, I didn't make it clear that, sometimes the options are tapering off. Sometimes that is the only healthy and realistic way to do something.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the only possible way to do something
Yeah.
without, having major negative consequences in your life.
Mhm.
Um, but I also do think there's something qualitatively different about
Yeah.
getting to zero on whatever it is and staying there,
Totally.
whether or not that's a cold turkey switch or if you've tapered down to zero.
Mhm.
Um, for example, a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I did taper down my caffeine intake to zero.
Mm-hmm.
and did not take the extra week or whatever to stay at 0.
Mm-hmm.
And while I did see some benefits, I feel like in the past I tapered down and then stayed at 0 for a while, and
Yeah.
I didn't feel as much of sort of a difference, right? Like, or at least I can't realistically say that I gave myself the full experience of, hey, what does my life look like without caffeine?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I had that for 24 hours and then started ramping back up,
Yeah.
like a very like
Yeah.
instead of sort of staying down for a while and then going back up. And that's the main thing I wanted to highlight is just there's like a qualitative difference once you're at 0 for whatever the thing is, whether that's digital. Like there's a big difference between, oh, I check my phone a few times a day and like I can't get texts, I can't get emails for
Mm-hmm.
multiple days in a row. So yeah, just where possible, I think it's a really valuable experience.
Yeah, totally. I think it's, both are valuable, but I think having the 0 experience for at least a week or however long you're able to do and manage, I think is worthwhile to really self-reflect on how that thing, whether it's digital or caffeine or whatever, affects you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one more. That's the last thing I want to highlight is that
Yeah, totally.
I think that's what's important is figuring out your relationship to these things, because
Mhm.
sometimes people talk about this in a way that's more around like you should cut this stuff out of your life. You should get no
Right,
notifications. You should never pay attention to your phone. You should
right.
throw your phone in the ocean and stomp on it and burn it and like. And I think it's it's
Right.
much more important to understand the relationship you have with these things, because the more, I guess, just like aware and present you are, the
Yeah.
more mindful you can make choices about your use and get yourself to a place that you feel is nice and healthy and feels good. Like I'll go back to, the drinking thing for me is like there are times and places where drinking is nice for me.
Hmm.
However, not at the quantities that I was having it in the past.
Hmm.
And only through sort of having these breaks have I been able to sort of like, okay, 4 or 5 drinks, maybe too much.
Hmm.
3 sometimes is too much. Like 1 or
Hmm.
2, cool. 1 or 2 is a nice, safe
Yeah.
area. Like maybe once or twice a week, not every day. Like,
Yeah.
but only through having these breaks was I able to sort of narrow down to like, okay, this is what feels good and nice and right. But I don't think it's about like cut this stuff out. For some people, it is.
Hmm.
For some people, you get down to 0 and you realize like my life is fundamentally better than it was when I was doing any amount. Or like when I get to the 1 to 2 level, or if I have, Reddit on my phone or whatever, like I can't just get on there for 5 minutes. If I do it, I'm scrolling for an hour and a half. Like I just can't do it. But it's all about just understanding your relationship so you can make the kinds of choices that feel correct to you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. If you appreciate us, because we appreciate you, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.